Today, I'm kicking off a three-part series looking at the challenges, psychology, and impact of conflict issues. Now, there are three kinds of conflict that cause shutdown and pain. And through the course of my group work and one-to-one practice, I found that for many, these conflict issues are the number one cause of feeling blocked, stuck, and confused. Now, it can be tricky to understand what's actually happening in the midst of it all, let alone navigate out to these calmer and more productive waters. And unfortunately, the cost of not doing so can run very, very high. So in these episodes, I want to give you some insight into each of the three kinds of conflict. We'll look at what may be happening internally that gets you all blocked up. Plus, I'll be offering some simple steps you can take to move you forward. Also, I've got an event coming up that I think you're going to love. This is where I'll be teaching you the simplest and most effective tool I know for resolving all three kinds of conflict and finding harmony. It's a slice of genius and works like magic, and I pretty much use it with every single client I see. And I'll be letting you know how you can join me for that at the end of this episode. So stay with me and let's dive into part one, internal conflict. Welcome to the Be a Brilliant Human podcast with me, Joel Young. If you're looking to improve your life, to heal, to grow, and mature as an individual, but maybe you found that some of the personal development and consciousness stuff has given you the impression that you need to be super serious and vigilant to get anywhere meaningful, or feeling like maybe you're just not up to snuff, well, this show is here to remind you of your humanity, and in fact that's where your true joy and brilliance lies. With over 25 years of experience in the transformation biz and having developed MPA, one of the world's simplest, pressure-free approaches to growth and well-being, if I do say so myself, I'll be sharing tips, steps, and insights that'll help you navigate all the aspects of life as a growth-seeking being. On this show, it comes to you with a good dose of humour, maybe a smattering of colourful language, a reminder not to take things so personally, and most importantly, to be kind to yourself along the way. Make sure you hit that follow button, and let's get into it. Hello, and welcome to the Be a Brilliant Human podcast with me, Joel Young. I'm delighted that you're here. We are at episode number 115, which means if you want to have a look at the show notes, there's quite good show notes for today. You can go to www.beabrillianthuman.com/115 and that'll get you there. Well, how are you doing? How's it going? How's 2022 for you? It's funny, I'm hearing a lot from people that are finding the beginning of this year to be in a space of not quite sure what's going to happen. I don't know if it's the big, what do they call it? The big C, that'll do. Not that one, this one. The pandemic one. The effect of all those lockdowns, not lockdowns, all that kind of stuff, or what it is. But over the years, I found that at the beginning of a year, I listened to clients and friends and people, there does seem to be a bit of a theme. So I'm curious how you're doing this year. Now, one of the things that I've seen as one of the core things that gets us blocked up is conflict. That's why I'm talking about conflict in this and the next two episodes. And it's kind of fascinating when I began to realize that really it's one of the core things. It's like you can talk about it in terms of beliefs or emotions or whatever the sort of in quotes core issue is. But I think at its heart, for most people, it's not that there are those particular things happening. It's that they're in conflict with something else, or that we're in conflict with another party, or there's conflict happening. And often it's not the conflict itself, although that's part of the makeup of what gets us stuck. But it's often that we have an issue with the conflict itself, or we don't know how to resolve it. And when you can resolve the conflict in a way that, because conflict ultimately gets you stuck. If you get stuck in a conflict, it's like everything jams up. It's very hard for the system, be it the body or the mind or the soul or whatever it is that's getting jammed up in some kind of, or caught up in some kind of conflict. It's very difficult then to move. And then there are lots of knock-on consequences that we'll kind of talk a bit about today. In terms of, once you get bound up, we can often sort of take ourselves into a space of shutdown or worse, self-beration, that kind of stuff. So I think it's a really important topic, and I'm delighted to be kind of bringing your attention to these three kinds of conflict. And also, as I said in the intro here, is that I've got an event. I'm really excited about this event. I'm going to be sharing a technique effectively. So if, say, you're I mean, it can work for anybody, but if you're a coach or a therapist or any kind of change worker, it's so simple you can slot it into your practice. And it's a way, when you can identify that there's a particular conflict at play, then this gives you kind of the magic bullet really to help do what's necessary to transcend that conflict and get that flow happening again, to find a way for each of the sides to move forward. It's an amazing tool, and it's part of the MPA frames. So firstly, if you're new, you're going, what are you talking about? MPA, it's November Papa Alpha, it's non-personal awareness. So if you listen for a long time, you know that, I missed a non-personal awareness. I came up with it back in 2007. And it's all over the world now, and I've just finished the first practitioner training, which was amazing. And so, but part of the expansion of MPA, which is a simple 6-line spoken word process that really takes the friction out of things and helps you not take things so personally, are the frames. And there's nearly 40 frames that I've developed over the time. And the one that I'll be teaching in this event, which I'm calling the harmony equation, because a lot of them are like equations, is probably one of the most powerful of all the frames, certainly one that I use the most in my practice. So I'm very excited to be sharing it. I did used to share it in events many years ago, but it hasn't been available at all except through the practitioners. But I decided this was a really good topic to offer and to share and to put out there in this new way. So it'll be an online event, but I'm going to talk more about it. I'll give you all the details, all the scoop about it at the end of this. But I did want to sort of mention that that's coming. If you're not interested in coming to the event, well, when it gets to that bit, you can just take what you get from what I share. But I think you're going to love it. So stick around and find out. And there's a super special deal that I've got on for you as a listener, because you'll be hearing it. You'll be the first, I think, to listen to. If you listen today when this comes out, you'll be the first to hear about this. So you can jump in and get the special deal if it calls to you, which I hope it will. So without further ado, today I'm going to talk about internal conflict. So we're kind of going to go through kind of what I'm talking about by internal conflict. I also want to kind of lay out sort of what happens internally. I think it's really important to understand what that is and what the cost of it is. And then towards the end, I'm going to offer some perspectives that I think will be powerful for you to take away from this podcast. And I've got a strategy for you today, which will point you to a thing that I've shared before, which I think is a really good first step to get you going before the event. But I'm going to start off today with talking about conflict in general. But before we get into inner conflict, I want to talk about good conflict versus bad conflict. So let's start there. So if you're a conflict averse person, and there's a lot of people out there who are conflict averse, then me saying good conflict versus bad conflict may have you going, what do you mean good conflict? I just want peace. Well, it's not that there isn't bad conflict, because there certainly is, but a lot of it isn't actually a bad thing. There's kind of a necessity for healthy or good conflict. If you think about it, I like to think of like the idea of a bird going out of the nest. A young bird has to become a fledgling, and nature, I do a lot of, in case you don't know, I do a lot of wildlife photography. It's like my absolute love and hobby. And if you watch birds and nature in general, kicking the youngsters out of the nest is all part of growing up. They have to do it in order to survive. They have to sort of face the discomfort of going out into the world, getting out of the nest, taking the risk of the first flight. All these are examples of potential conflict, but it's very healthy, and in fact it's very, very necessary. in our human lives, where we can meet a lot of conflict is at the point where we want to grow. If you want to grow, you've got to get out of your comfort zone. Now, in your comfort zone, there's going to be a certain amount of will to stay there. And to get to the end, you kind of got to bust out, and that often creates some form of conflict. And also in terms of evolution, we have to become comfortable with failure, and failure can be confrontational and therefore imply conflict. Also, I think one of the things that's madly lacking in this world at the moment is an appetite for real discussion. Now, I'm all in favor of sensitivity, but a lot of the sort of very trendy sort of PC stuff, political correctness and all that kind of thing, I think there's a danger there that we can lose, or what I'm seeing a lot is the danger of the ability to have real discussion because of that avoidance of the potential of offending somebody, or by speaking your truth somehow you're ridiculed as not being a decent part of society. Now, we all will have our opinions about what that means to be a good citizen, but I think real discussion that actually makes progress and gets people more connected is going to involve, some form of disagreement, which therefore can create conflict. And I think that's a very healthy thing. So the issue comes when we have an issue with conflict itself, when we find that somehow we're unable to deal with it, handle it, and those kind of things. That's when it becomes very, very painful internally. And I think, one of the key things that I would say about this kind of situation is one of the things to aim for is to find comfort with the discomfort of that healthy conflict. Now, there is, of course, bad conflict. And I think where that comes into play is where you find a situation where somebody's got some kind of unhealthy attachment, like attachment to the degree there's no room for budging and they're fighting almost for fighting's sake. Maybe it's tied up with their identity and it's not necessarily a healthy identity, or maybe it's some kind of status battle. So if you like, the purpose or intent behind that conflict isn't necessarily progressive. It doesn't have anything to do with making progress. It's more about that kind of winning for winning's sake. And the other kind, which is more in goes more into the passive aggressive kind of area, or it can be very outwardly aggressive, is fighting for the status quo. Now, this could be arguably a matter of opinion, but if there's conflict or argument or a fight, to maintain a status quo, and I would clarify this or contextualize it, which goes against the shift in the energy that's happening, what's becoming, if you like, what the energy wants, then you're, as Abraham Hicks would say, you're swimming upstream. Then that sort of fight or invoked conflict on behalf of the status quo against what's really here, I would say I would class that as bad conflict. But I think for the most part, counter to what a lot of us feel is that, or are taught to feel, is that the conflict generally is a good thing. I think many people who achieve tremendous success in the world in terms of creating legacies, and whether it's building businesses or changing the world in different ways, that they're not shy of the conflict. They can slip into bad conflict at times. But for the most part, the key there is to be, again, comfortable with the discomfort of conflict. But that's so easy to say, but for certain personality types, conflict and confrontation and those kind of things are incredibly scary. And so in those cases, it's all very well, because there are other personality types that are naturally inclined to be, fine with conflict or even invite conflict. There's different personality types. But what I found is, in the personal development world in which I live and in which this podcast is based, a very large portion of the people that find themselves coming to self-help work and that kind of thing are generally conflict averse. The personality type is more in the sort of people-pleasing, service, those kind of things. And the tendency is for many of those folks to be more naturally inclined to be conflict averse. And that is in of itself, I would say, I'm going to prove my own point here, that many of the issues that I see with people that come as clients or in group work, at its heart is a conflict issue. So that's part of why I really want to do this for you, so you can have a chance to have a look at, if that's the case for you, what is the issue that's going on with conflict. So there's good conflict, there's bad conflict, but again, as I said at the beginning, I think the main issue is issues with the conflict. So again, these 3 episodes are about the 3 kinds of conflict. I'll let you know today what they are. There's the internal conflict or inner conflict, which we're talking about today. There's also the kind of conflict where you're in conflict with other people. That's more the outward conflict. And there's another kind of conflict which we'll cover in the third part of this, which is very much sort of strong for those who are more of the personality type that are generally conflict averse, is when other people are in conflict. People we love are in conflict. And that can create tremendous pain and pressure and discomfort inside of ourselves. But for today, let's have a look at inner conflict. So what is inner conflict? Well, in a nutshell, it's fighting with yourself or disagreeing with yourself. With myself, but there's only one of me. Sometimes it's called having a split. There are some circles of personal development or psychology that call having like an inner split. But there's some kind of conflict inside of you. So to have a conflict inside of you, you have to kind of get your head around the fact that we're not really a singular entity. I mean, we sort of say, my name's Joel, and Joel refers to the whole community of Joel. And within that community of Joel, really, I like to say we're all multiple personality. There are really many aspects of me. And so with inner conflict, what you've got going on is that those different aspects of yourself are in conflict. They have differences of opinion or differences of perspective, and those things are coming into loggerheads, and they're often brought into stark, stark clarity, or their presence is felt when something happens or there's some situation that's going on that needs some kind of decision or some kind of action or calls for something, and there are those differences that are going on. In MPA, which really works at an identity level, those inner aspects or personalities, I like to think of them as literal identities. Because when we identify with something, which literally means that's me, that is, which is the same, by the way, as taking something personally. You know, taking something personally is saying that's me, that is. We can have lots of different selves. And each identity is like you and I are as a whole. You know, we have a life, we have a purpose, we have an urge to survive and do what it takes, and we have survival strategies. And all these different identities inside of us have all of those things. And while there may be commonalities based on the meta self, the you, use your name to take the whole of you, there are, they have all of those things, and therefore they'll fight for survival or fight for their status or, control, all of those things. So there are so many different aspects to the self, and depends where you draw the boundary. So one of the things we talk about in MPA is like, you can talk about yourself as your personality, your soul, or the pure being. Those are 3 different aspects of self that are all constantly alive inside of us. And actually one of the great gifts of MPA, the MPA philosophy, which you can learn more about in the advanced training, is that it helps you to understand and resolve the paradoxes and conflicts of those different aspects. Because if you find yourself locked into one at the expense of the others, that's where that kind of fight and blocking and fight for survival can come into play. It's more about knowing what the strengths are of each of them and when it's most appropriate to give any of those parts the driving seat, and then having them work in harmony, which the harmony equation you'll learn how to do. So a good example that you might be able to relate to, say, is there's inside of you may be the good girl and the bad girl. or the rebel, perhaps. So I'm using very sort of archetypal ones here. It's not always the way we actually label our internal identities is fascinating, and some of them fit the models, the archetypes, those kind of things. They can be very useful, but often in the subtlety of how our energy works, how we name those parts is really important. Again, that's something I'll be covering in the event of how to identify the specific names. But good girl and bad girl is a good example. So there may be a situation where you have that conflict between what the bad girl wants to do and what the good girl wants to do. And, it may be that there's a tendency for one to have the upper hand. But when there can be situations where you find that, in this case, very much an internal struggle happening, which can lock you down. And the thing about these different identities is they have different motivations and different fears. So, some of the identities within you may be easily swayed or find it important, or it matters to them what others do, think, and say. And some may be more self-motivated. So as you start to look at this, you realize with all these different aspects inside of ourselves, with different motivations and different fears, when it comes to moving around in the world and being, again, confronted by life and all its choices, that's where, if we don't know how to get these parts working in harmony and smoothly together, understanding each other without dismissing or belittling or all those kind of things to each other, just as like any relationship really. If you don't know how to do that, then you can get jammed up in all sorts of different ways, and often it kind of gets pushed down and goes unconscious, and then we just wonder what the hell's going on and why we're so useless. That's kind of how it goes. So let me give you an example. So a classic example of where this sort of internal conflict can create issues, or where it might show up, is the classic one is, should I stay or should I leave a situation? And the classic one of that is, say, a long-term relationship. I've certainly wrestled with this in my history. And, so I'm going to use long-term relationship as an example, but any situation we've got to stay or leave, this could apply. And, by the way, one of the episodes I'm going to recommend that you listen to is episode 5. So you can go to www.beabrillianthuman.com/5 to find that one, which is making the decision to let go, which is a great start point for sort of moving in this direction. So in a should I stay or should I leave this relationship, there may be, and I'm just making this up as I go along, so maybe that you've got like this freedom part. Now the freedom part longs to unclip her wings and get the love she deserves, and she fears feeling trapped and unfulfilled forever. So that's sort of, again, painting a general picture of what it can feel like to one part of you. And the other part might be, let's call it the security part. The security part has a whole different set of motivations and fears. So it fears change in general because it's a security part. Its job is there to sort of to make things secure and stable. And maybe the fears sort of go into, it's like maybe there's financial implications. I know for a lot of women in particular, to generalize, but it's like that's generally true, down to real discussions. There may be financial implications of, say, getting a divorce, or there may be sort of a sort of fear from that security part of just the overall conflict of the separation process. If any of you have been through a divorce, you understand, or a separation after a long time, there are all sorts of potential ramifications and challenges that can come up out of the whole separation process. And maybe what can happen with the security part, so it might start to argue its point. Okay, so it says, well, things will get better. You should put up with it. You're just being selfish. This is the kind of inner dialogue you'll get from the security part, while the freedom part's going, we need to break free. We're dying here. But the security part comes back and creates terrifying stories of loneliness and abandonment by mutual friends and the family and all those kind of things. Or if you've got kids involved, how terrible it will be for them. And you need to stay miserable and unhappy as an example. Oops, I slipped into my opinion there. Or my sarcasm. Anyway, But this is a very real and very painful situation that I see a lot with people, and I've experienced myself the pain of that. So that's the kind of thing that can come up, and this is a classic example of internal conflict. Now, in that situation, chances are there's also external conflict happening. There's probably conflict with with the other party in the relationship, but this is how the internal conflict can show up. So let's have a look at kind of what can happen, how we can notice the responses that we have internally when there's this kind of issue. So here I want to give you an idea of in one sense, how to spot that there's internal conflict happening, because I think that's part of it, as I said in the intro, that we can often miss the fact that it's a conflict, and we'll find ways, I'll talk a bit more about this in a moment, but we find ways to send out red herrings that will take us down dead ends rather than looking at the core conflict that is at play. So in a way, what I'm pointing to here is the symptoms that you can recognize and go, chances are that's a conflict. Now, oftentimes, especially in the example with, should I stay or should I go, it may be bleeding obvious that there's a conflict going on inside. But often it's more subtle than that. So I want to go through some of the things that I've seen so often that could be symptoms or signals of conflict. And then I want to talk about what that really does to you if it's not addressed. So one of the most common responses to conflict, if there's an issue around conflict, again, if you're someone who's like, I love conflict, bring it on, let's have a fight. This isn't going to be you. All right. But for many people who find conflict very difficult, again, I'm going to use confrontation and conflict, they're similar things, or even challenge. But the response that I see most is paralysis. So paralysis is a strong word, but fundamentally it means some kind of shutdown. Now, the way that can show up, one of the main ways it shows up is procrastination. I mean, it can go straight to shutdown, but procrastination is certainly one of the most fundamental ways to do it. You basically stick your head in the sand, do something else. Now, the interesting thing about procrastination as a strategy of conflict or confrontation avoidance is it's designed as a diversion. So it diverts you away from the thing that's feared and brings up the stuff in you and takes you on a different direction that just moves away. And it comes alongside usually a whole bunch of rationalizations. And the rationalizations are the reasons why it's important to do that very unimportant thing now, rather than face the confrontation or conflict of what really matters in the moment. And ultimately it kind of takes you in this kind of shrinking circle. And but it really is a red herring, and certainly it's one of the signs I know in my life, because my personality type is conflict averse. These days I'm so much more comfortable with conflict. I actually enjoy healthy conflict and like healthy discussions, which used to terrify the shit out of me years ago. And one of the things that I often use as a signal to myself, if I go into a very old habit of procrastination, I'm going to stop and ask myself some questions. And usually there's some kind of confrontative experience there. For me, it's often about there's something that is in the unknown, and I find that my little inner self finds that a challenge. I know now that procrastination is a really good signal that's happening, and then I can come back and take care of it and do something about it. But if left alone, that procrastination and that paralysis can take us into lockdown. I know it's a charged word right now in the world, as we're here in the beginning of 22 and we're still facing lockdowns. But that inner lockdown has the same effect. It shuts you off, it shuts you down, makes you feel disconnected from yourself. And the thing about paralysis as a response to conflict is it takes a hell of a lot of energy to do that. It can be so exhausting. And the thing is that the paralysis, the procrastination, the shutdown, all of these things which are fundamental avoidance strategies, they don't actually change. If there's something coming to a head, it's not going to change it. It just means it will come to the head out of your control. You'll be on the back foot. You'll be surprised by it. And that has a knock on to yourself and your own experience. So paralysis, procrastination, general avoidance is kind of, when there's different flavors of that, withdrawal. These are all good signs that if you're generally conflict averse, that this is a sign that you're avoiding that conflict. So that's a good thing to look for. So the next one is polarity. So what I'm talking about here is the tendency to do that flip-flopping. So you go from one polarity or one perspective to another perspective, and you dance around from one to the other. And in the moment you're in one of them, it feels like, oh, that's the right thing. And then suddenly some little trigger, maybe somebody says something, or a thought comes in, or your mood shifts, or, somewhere in your cycle changes, and you flip-flop to the other side. And each seems real, but on examination, there's just this kind of absence of commitment to picking a route between the two, or finding a way that serves both. Now, the cost of this behavior is interesting. I don't think many people look at it this way, but this has been my experience with clients and people I've worked with in rooms, and certainly with myself, is the cost of this is there's that inconsistency. What it really does, because you're not really addressing what's true in relation to both sides of the equation, is you can get repeated experiences of self-betrayal. So you convince yourself of one side, then you flip-flop to the other side, that previous decision feels betrayed. And over time, this can build to sort of a loss of self-trust. I don't trust myself to make a decision because I'll change it in the next 5 minutes, which can impact your confidence and is a major contributing factor to the erosion of self-worth. So, and again, the other thing about that sort of flip-flopping and that lack of commitment to a particular path is you kind of get patchy results. Now, I'm talking about this in terms of the energetics of the thing. Again, MPA is you could say it's an energy medicine tool. It looks at the world as everything is energy, and we look at the energetic patterns of things and the energetic interrelationship between things. And that kind of patchy output tends to give a patchy response from the universe. And if you keep doing this self-betrayal, this flip-flopping, you can end up living in this sort of sense of pointlessness. What's the point? It never works out for me. These rationalizations, these stories, nothing works out for me. Which, that's kind of, that's a world that is, going to take you down a very depressive route. But it also leads to the next one that I'm going to say is a symptom. But this is kind of I would say this is generally an escalated symptom. So if some form of paralysis or inconsistency has shown up, then it can lead to, and pretty swiftly at times, self-attack. So self-attack is where you basically start berating yourself. You invoke the cruel mind, the self-criticism, and that can escalate in a big way. Again, I kind of used examples here where, like in the example of do I stay or should I go? It's like, well, you should put up with it. You're just being selfish. Those are kind of part of the rationalizations where that cruel mind is evoked. We attack ourselves. Or if you've been inconsistent, then you can start to go from just in that flip-flop between perspectives to then beating yourself up for that because you betrayed yourself, and you're off down a path which is miles from where you started and just causing pain upon pain on a pain. And if this is allowed to go on and fester, and you completely lose sight of what the actual thing is that's the issue, the conflict that wants resolution, then you can end up living in a cruel world. And so many people I see end up like this is the set point for their reality. And in the extreme cases, this is where you see self-harm. And again, just as as in with inconsistency, this is going to massively hit your sense of self-confidence, your self-worth. And ultimately, this world, this cruel world, cruel mind, self-harm, self-attack this is what creates the depressive environment. It comes on the back of already being shut down, but that's sort of going to create a cloud of depressive, cynical, all the yucky stuff comes on the back of that self-attack. Now, the last one that's a symptom for this, which is slightly different, is projection. Now, projection is where basically you take what's going inside, you feel like it's too much, and you spit it outwards. Now, I'm sure you're a very nice person, but often nice people do this, but in a passive way. That's where you get the passive aggressiveness. Come on, hands up. Have you ever been passive aggressive? Generally, I know you're golden hearted, wouldn't hurt a fly. But when you've got that conflict going on, it's too much. You know, it just kind of seeps out. It comes out. You're just being a slightly shitty person at times. Or it can come out full on. Have you ever had one of those explosions where you're already beating yourself up? You know there's something you need to do and you're not doing it, or you're not facing something. Someone points out to you and bang, they get the full what's Gatling gun response. Even though you don't like anger. And it might come out in a very civilized way. That's what we call the passive aggressive stuff. Very civilized. You know, I didn't say anything wrong. Yeah, energetically, let's think about that. What was the energy underneath that very civilized, well put, constructed sentence? This is called projection. Basically, you've got stuff going on inside of you, which is very painful. And I do, obviously, I'm laughing as I do on this podcast with this, because it is kind of funny. But it's also super fucking painful, let's face it. We don't generally do that projection unless it is too much for us to bear inside. But the thing about this, and the cost of this, is, as I said, with the inconsistency, what you put out tends to come back. So the way this generally works with projection, you know, you may be spitting outwards all of this stuff, maybe your criticism comes out, you know, it's going in all the time, it starts to come out other people, or it becomes this savage Gatling gun attack. But what then often happens is it ricochets straight back at you, and then you end up in this realm of guilt and shame, and you cycle back to the inner attack. But now you've added this extra layer. Now you've done this red herring thing of, the red herring is that you start focusing on the behavior. Oh, I'm so terrible, my behavior's bad, or their behavior's bad, which is far removed from the actual issue, which is, the conflict issue. So this is like deep down the rabbit hole of not effectively working with the conflict. So all of this, it all comes from a basic internal conflict, and there are simple ways to resolve that. Part of my excitement about the harmony equation is because I'm going to teach you how to do that at the event, which again, I'm going to tell you a bit more about how you can actually get access to that or sign up for that at the end of this program. But there are so many simple ways to absolutely get to the heart of it, because when you don't, this is where you slip off into these territories, and they are very, very painful. Now, before we get into talking about the harmony equation that I've got coming up for you soon, I want to talk about some of the things that I think you can take away today, some perspective gems, maybe I'll call them. And I'm going to offer you that strategy that will help you going forward. So what I hope I've given you so far is kind of a roadmap of the symptoms that can show up of what, if you've got an issue with inner conflict, and the kind of symptoms and behaviors that can indicate that to you. Because as I said before, one of the main things that I find people don't quite put the pieces of the puzzle together is where they don't realize that ultimately it's a conflict that's happening. Because while I've used an example which is very obvious, should I stay or should I go, a lot of the stuff that happens in life isn't so obviously a conflict. It takes a bit of mindfulness, a bit of presence, and a bit of investigation to discover it's a conflict. But how do you know how to do that unless you know what the symptoms and the signs are? So that's hopefully what I've given you today. That being said, some perspectives that I think can really help, that sort of take you in the right direction. I think the main one that, once you go, okay, so it's a conflict, is to identify what the different aspects are as best you can. And then the key really is to find, I guess, what you'd call the meta intention. Remember that each of the different parts that are in conflict have different perspectives, which means different intentions, different fears, those kind of things. And what I find draws those parts together is to find that the something that both parts can agree on. So, which again, with some self-inquiry, you can do that. When I talk to you in a moment about the harmony equation, it's a super simple way to find that. But I think at this point, just to be mindful of that, there's something that both of them can agree on, something that where they can both pull together, which takes them out of conflict into some purposeful movement. And one of the reasons, that makes a difference is because often the inner argument, and this is also true, of course, of arguing with other people, is, if you understand there's something common to pull together towards, so you have that sort of meta level of agreement, there's conflict about how you get something done is usually much easier to resolve than conflict about what. And often at the base level, the conflict is about what the issue is, what's happening, what the consequences are, all those kind of things. Whereas if you go, we're both pulling for this, both parts of our inner parts are pulling for this, then it's just a question of the mechanisms of how. And yes, that can still create conflict, but you can use the same basic approach to find a way where there's sort of less stuck making conflict and more movement promoting conflict, which is, or harmony even, which is even better. So what I want to invite you to do is to go and listen to episode 5. Episode 5 is called Making the Decision to Let Go. And while it's about ultimately letting go, which definitely applies to the, to the should I stay or should I go kind of thing, it talks about connecting with your inner decision maker. Now, there's an approach in there that I lay out that is really good for overcoming that paralysis stage to begin with. So it doesn't necessarily get you to the point where you can find that common agreement, but it's certainly somewhere where you can get to a point where you can align with some decision. Because again, a lot of the stuckness in this conflict is it puts you in a place of no decision being made. Again, if we go back to the flip-flopping example, so if you listen to episode 5, think of that as your homework. Then it's something that I think can help you, give you something really practical you can do. And I haven't got time to go through all of those steps that I lay out in that episode here. So, what's the easy cure, or the easy approach to sort of really get to the heart of it? And as I said at the beginning, the one that I know more than any other is what I'll be teaching in the harmony equation. So I'm going to tell you all about that now. So I know not all of you necessarily want to come, but if you do, then you can stay tuned. If not, it's been great having you listen today, and I've enjoyed this. I'll be back next week with part 2. But stick around. I think you're going to love this event. It's going to be super practical and powerful. If you like listening to the podcast, this is going to be like podcast on steroids. It's going to be held on Zoom, so it'll be interactive. We'll be in person and live. And there'll be 2 dates to choose from, so you can choose a time that suits you. And you know what, even if you can't make it, there'll be replays if you book. So stick around if you want to hear all about how you can sign up for that event. Yeah, let me tell you about that. Thanks so much for sticking around. I can't wait for this event. I'm really excited about it. To start off with, I want you to imagine like a vending machine. A vending machine that what you have is the 2 conflicting parts of you, or the 2 conflicting energies, if you like, and you can press a couple of buttons on each, and out the bottom, like as you'd say in America, Twinkie bars, or a marathon here in the UK or whatever, pops out the bottom. And what that marathon bar or Twinkie bar is the perfect key to provide harmony, peace, common intention for both of those sides. That's what the harmony equation is. And in terms of MPA, because you can apply the MPA process to it, it's the perfect setup for some MPA. This is called the integration frame. And It's so powerful. I said in the introduction, I use it all the time with clients, and part of my understanding that conflict is at the heart of so many blocks and so much confusion is the regularity. Once it popped out of me, as part of the growing MPA stuff, I began to realize, well, I'm using it a lot. Why is this coming up so regularly? Because people were describing these parts that were in conflict or conflict they had with other people, and this sort of process, this key really, can be applied to all three kinds of conflict that we're talking about here. So today we've talked about inner conflict. It's amazing when you identify the parts that are played in the conflict that's going on, just to bring that energetic knowing of that common ground together is absolutely fantastic. But you can also use it if you've got conflict with someone else. So if you're in conflict with somebody outside of yourself, maybe it's your partner, maybe it's your kids, maybe it's the government, but that's causing you stress, then again, you can use this process really powerfully to get access to that which will bring you the peace, harmony, ultimately movement, which makes you more resourceful in making a difference, in bringing what you really want into your life. Super powerful that. But it's also incredibly powerful what we're going to get to in part 3, which is when there's outer conflict. In fact, part of the event, as well as I'm going to giving you the full instructions on how to use the MPA integration frame, but also there's a way to apply it when there are two external entities, energies, or whatever, that are in conflict, and that's causing issues. Now, you might say, well, I don't really understand what that is, but I'm going to teach you a version of it that I call the parental frame, where you actually get to work with I call them your parental energies, but you can think of it as mum and dad or whatever, your parents. Because I think inside every single person, there is some fundamental conflict at play, which relates to our childhood and our upbringing. And it's that conflict that was perceived between the parents. And the parental frame is a way of working with the integration frame, where you can literally get to the core of what that parental conflict was, and ultimately what that younger inner you was truly looking for. That is, again, that kind of key piece of their personality that was somehow missing or stuck. And it's super powerful. Every time I've used the parental frame in a group context, and also in private work, occasionally I specifically use the parental frame. It's so powerful and can be so deep, and is such a beautiful, beautiful thing to experience. So in the time that we have together, and as I said to you before, this event is going to be super focused, super practical. Literally, I'm not going to fluff it up with a bunch of theory. I'll do a little bit about MPA for anybody who's not really done much in the way of MPA before, as that's relevant. We'll get right down to the nuts and bolts of how to do the integration frame. There will be some practice work that we do in a way which is very similar to what we do in the mastery program, which is our practitioners training. And certainly, if it's something that you're interested in, this is something, if you're a coach or a therapist, a change worker, whether it's massage therapy, reflexology, coaching, all of those kind of things. This is a tool that's going to be so powerful in your practice. And if you're kind of curious about the mastery, if you're looking at it and going, oh, do I really want to be an MPA practitioner? You'll get a taste of the power of it from this event. So there'll be practical work where you get a chance to experience what we call in mastery the crucibles, where I have a chance to really see you do the process and then help you nuance it to get the best from it, which is a lot of fun. It is fun, honest. In fact, all of the mastery participants from this first time I've run it, we finished it now, loved the crucibles and thought they were incredibly powerful as learning tools. I think we all learn when we see how other people are doing it. So again, it's a tool that will give you the ability to resolve internal conflict, resolve conflict with others, and resolve issues that arise when those around you are in conflict. And again, in the hands of a coach, therapist, it's a tool. I use it all the time in my practice. You'll be able to use it with your clients. Really cool technique. A lot of the times just so you know, I mean, I've had clients of mine sort of, they kind of look wide-eyed at me when they get to that, you know, the Twinkie bar that pops out the bottom of the vending machine. They're like, ah. And it's almost just by getting that awareness of what that key is, can have profound and powerful transformational impact on them. And then when you bring in the MPA as well, it just really supercharges it and knocks it out of the park. So here's how I'm running it, just so you know. So it's going to be, I'm basically going to offer you 2 dates. Now, your ticket means you can come to both if you want to do it twice. But I'll be asking you which one you'd like to go to. I'm running it on February the 10th and on February the 13th. February the 10th is the Thursday, and that's going to be a morning event, and then on the Sunday it's going to be an afternoon event. It's just 3.5 to 4 hours. I put in 3.5 hours. I'll allow a bit of time if we run over, but it's 9 till 12:30 on the Thursday, and it's 1 till 4:30 on the Sunday. Now, why am I doing that? Well, firstly, there are different time zones. For example, on the Mastery, we had somebody from Australia, and a 9 a.m. start. It's a lot easier than an afternoon start. And Sunday afternoon, what a great way to spend Sunday afternoon, learning something that can change your life. So the way you do it, if you want to find out more about it, you can go over to www.thempaacademy.com/harmony. That's www.thempaacademy.com/harmony. If you go to the show notes for today, you can find a link for that there. Now, I am doing an insane thing. I'm going to offer you such a good deal. I want to get a bunch of people on this who are just going to say, right, I'm in, let's do it. You'll see over there that this event is a bargain at £297. But depending on when you're listening to this, this is going to be an evergreen podcast. But this is going out on, what is it, the 19th of January 22. If you act fast, you can get in there and you use the coupon code HARMONY in capital letters, HARMONY. You're going to get 85% off. That means you'll pay just £44.55, less than 50 quid, for 3.5 hours. That will give you a tool you can use for life. Give you a tool that will help you resolve all of this conflict. And if you're a change worker or some kind of therapist or coach, it's a tremendous asset into your business. So I think you're going to love this event. You can, again, go over to www.thempaacademy.com/harmony. Use code HARMONY. You don't have to use it. You can pay me the full whack if you feel like it. But get the discount. It's less than 50 quid. And just so you know, because I've talked about being a coach, you don't have to be a professional to use it and learn it. This class is going to give you everything that you need to bring harmony into your own life. It's just that if you are a therapist or a coach, this is something that's going to not only do that for you in your personal life, but is a fantastic tool to use in your practice. And remember that from today, you know, we've got 2 more parts of this series to go, but from today, I hope you can see that there are so many different areas where conflict is at play. And as I said before, it can be tricky to navigate your way through that territory. This process, the integration frame, and how I'm going to teach it in the harmony equation is such a powerful, simple way to take the work out of that, to take the work because on the podcast today, I've said, go and think in terms of meta, sort of what's the meta approach the intention that's going to work for both. Now, there are clearly ways to do that. I've kind of given you a huge clue there. But when you go into the mind and figuring it out and all that kind of stuff, you can get a little lost, and you can get lost into all the dogma of beliefs and ideas. The way that this works, and with the MPA as well, it literally is. That's why I use the metaphor of a vending machine. It's press a couple of, there's basically 2 buttons each side, and then bang, out comes the thing that's going to make the difference. Often in life, I don't know if you found this, I've certainly found this, that you can do lots of hard work and heavy lifting, but often it's the simple, subtle things that seem small and yet hold all the leverage for change. And that's what you get, the leverage for change, going from stuck, unhealthy conflict to harmony, movement, and clarity in where you're going, what you're doing, and in obviously your relationships. So I hope that's inspired you. You can go over now, head over to www.thempaacademy.com/harmony, and remember to use harmony in the coupon code to get your 85% off. Now, obviously, that's not going to be there forever. So I think that ends on the 6th of February at midnight. So you've not got long to use that coupon code, and then it'll go up in price. So go ahead, use that. And I thank you very much for sticking around for my little info dump. If you have any questions about it, of course, you can ping me an email, joel@nonpersonalawareness.com, or contact me via social media on all the usual places. Links to all the social media will be in the notes, and wherever you're listening to this, there'll always be social media links. You can find me there. Reach out, ask any questions you have. Otherwise, go ahead, get on that webpage, reserve your place. I do have only a certain number of places, so we'll see. I've got a feeling this one's going to go like hotcakes, especially 85% off, because it's a tremendous deal. So go ahead, do that now, and I will see you there. Big hugs, and I will see you next week for part 2. Thanks so much for listening. If you've enjoyed this show, I'd love you to do me a solid and tell someone about it. They can find us on Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, and most other podcast platforms. Plus, if you visit the website www.BABrillianthuman.com, you can share the show notes to social media and make my day. Also, make sure you hit that follow button, and if you haven't yet downloaded the MPA process sheet, head on over to joelyoungmpa.com and get your free copy today. Big love, and see you next time.